Hello and welcome. My name's Paul Ryder, and today in this video I want to introduce you to a phenomenal concept all about interpersonal relationships of codependence that get tangled up with emotionally manipulative behavior. Now, millions of people are experiencing what we're going to be discussing in this video today. However, if you don't know that it's happening, it's kind of like carbon monoxide. You can't see it, you can't smell it, but it can be incredibly toxic. In this concept, the drama triangle is going over 3 emotionally manipulative behaviors, and it wasn't me that created it. It was by a wonderful, amazing guy called Dr. Stephen Karpman. So without further ado, let's go and have a look at what the drama triangle is and the 3 emotionally manipulative aspects that can get tangled up to create disconnection within our relationships. Okay, so here we have the drama triangle, and there are the 3 aspects here. And again, this was created, I think, back in 1968 by Dr. Stephen Karpman. And what we're going to do is go over these 3 aspects. Now, I want you to keep in mind at all times, emotionally manipulative behavior hides in plain sight. Emotionally manipulative behavior hides in plain sight. It poses as one thing, but is something completely different. And that is how it happens so often, and people get tangled up with it. And also, I want you to see, emotionally manipulative behavior is not the person. It is a behavior that they are adopting to cope with a difficult time that they're going through, a trauma response. So firstly, we have what's known as the victim. Now, the victim is right at the bottom of the pile here. And the victim, I remember reading an amazing book called The Celestine Prophecies. Beautiful story. And one way of describing the victim is the poor me. Now, what we have to take into account here is there's a lot more to explain around the victim than just saying the word victim. If a person has had a trauma, then they can use emotionally manipulative behavior as a coping strategy. So there's a very big difference between a person who was a victim of abuse or a target of abuse and a person using a victim-based emotionally manipulative behavior. So you can see now, it's not just this case of calling somebody a victim. There are many aspects unfolding. And also, it could be that a person's going through a really difficult time and they're overwhelmed and they're reaching out for help. Or they could be using a victim emotionally manipulative behavior. Now, that might sound tangled up. I'm going to explain more about it as we go through the video. So the first emotionally manipulative behavior we've got is the victim. The victim wants to elicit guilt in other people, so other people will do everything for them. So in essence, they'll sit there on the floor, kind of like melting plastic, going, poor me, everything's going wrong, nobody's there for me. Let me tell you all of my problems. Okay, we're going to again go into a difference between whether that is a person in exhaustion and overwhelm, or if they're using emotional manipulative behavior to elicit guilt. Then the second one we've got here is the persecutor. Now, I didn't understand what the word persecutor meant when I very first heard about this. So if it sounds a little bit confusing to you, the words that I would use back then and today really would be the bully or the manipulator. So it's the attacking force, so the persecution. So you can see a story building up here. In order to have a victim, the victim has to have a problem or a challenge that puts them in a victim role. They've got this overwhelming oppression bearing down upon them. Now, as we go further along into this, you'll find that it doesn't just have to be a person. It can be the weather, for example. A person using a victim emotionally manipulative behavior will very often use anything and everything they can to say that they're being persecuted or that they are being bullied or manipulated. So you've got the persecutor, that is the attacking force, and then the person using the victim emotionally manipulative behavior has got an excuse to say that's why they are the victim. So what about this third role? Well, that is a very interesting one called the rescuer. Now, the rescuer Again, keep in mind, emotionally manipulative behavior hides in plain sight. The rescuer appears on the surface to be a really kind person, a really supportive person, somebody that you would want by your side at all times. However, this isn't quite what's actually going on. Remember, emotionally manipulative behavior hides in plain sight. So now let's put together a base understanding of what's going on here. You've got a person who's using the victim emotionally manipulative behavior. Remember, they're not a victim. They are using emotionally manipulative behavior. They might have been a target of abuse or a victim of abuse. That's something completely different than the behavior that they're using today. They can say that they are the victim because of the persecution of either a situation or another person. So here, when I mentioned about codependence, the person using the victim emotionally manipulative behavior actually needs a person using a persecution or a situation that's persecuting them or overwhelming them. So the victim needs the persecutor. See the codependence. Now the persecutor, if it's a person who is actually projecting their emotionally manipulative behavior, something like, for example, in my own training, I talk about the fault finder or the destroyer, for example. We could have then that person offloading their anger and frustration and abuse onto another person. So they would need to find a person who's in a victim emotionally manipulative behavior, somebody who's a poor me, because an abuser will look for a vulnerable target. And that's how it works, because when a person's using controlling emotionally manipulative behavior, they won't look for a person who they cannot control because it'd be too much. It's their coping strategy to be a victim. It's their coping strategy to be a persecutor. So they're going to want to use that emotionally manipulative behavior with other people who are vulnerable to that attack. So then we've got the rescuer. So it obviously makes very logical sense about the persecutor and the victim, because one's attacking the other, there's a dominating force and a vulnerable force, and that's their codependence. So what about the rescuer? Where did that fit in? Well, what the rescuer does is look for a victim because they want to feel a sense of self-validation, a sense of significance, or it could be that they're reliving a trauma. And I'm going to be explaining a lot more about that in upcoming videos. But what the rescuer will do is step in and they will look for the victim. So they will step in and almost put a shroud around them and say that it's okay, I've got your back, you need me. So now if we look at the whole picture, the victim is saying, poor me, everything's against me, everyone's against me, everything's hard. They try to elicit guilt in other people. They want people to feel sorry for them, so they get the attention. You take the persecutor who may be in an aggressive force. They could be frustrated, they could be angry. They're going to look for a person in a victim state, a vulnerable state, to offload all of their frustrations and aggressions onto. That makes logical sense. But the rescuer then steps in and they need a victim to rescue so that they feel a sense of significance. So if they're rescuing that poor little victim, they now have a role. They now have a purpose. However, as you can see here, the rescuer cannot rescue unless they have a victim. But the rescuer doesn't attack anybody, so it seems. So what do they need in order to be a rescuer? They actually need the persecutor to attack the person who's in the victim role so the rescuer can rescue the victim. Because the rescuer doesn't want to be the persecutor because they want to play the rescuer. And the persecutor doesn't want to play the rescuer. But here's the interesting thing. What about if the rescuer doesn't have a victim to rescue? What about if they antagonize another person to attack the person who's vulnerable in order to trigger that victim role in them so that they could rescue them. Now, this is what's known as enabling. The rescuer could actually use emotionally manipulative behavior, saying, life's really difficult for you. Life's a real struggle. I'm here for you. And then talk to them in a way to, like that whispering self-doubt in the back of their mind. And the victim will say, actually, yes, things are really difficult. And then the rescuer may say, yeah, it must be really difficult at work. I know you mentioned that person that you're having a really difficult time with. And then the victim may start to feel self-conscious or anxious about that person at work, and then start maybe acting more jittery around that person. Or the rescuer could even try to tempt the victim into defending themselves with the person who's persecuting them. So they attack, but they get shot down by the persecutor. So the rescuer steps in and says, it's okay, I'm here for you. Now, as mentioned, there are many, many, many levels deep on this, but I just wanted to take this video today to introduce you to the concept and then ask you a question, because that's what these videos are about. They're about looking at aspects of ways you can grow. Do you ever find yourself being the persecutor, the victim, or the rescuer? Now, one thing as well, it could be that a person's in a victim role and they're having a challenge with somebody at work, or it could be in their relationships, and they constantly turn to other people for support, keeping themselves in a victim state. Now, as we've looked at, it could be an external situation where a person is interacting with another person using one of the opposing emotional and manipulative behaviors of the other two. Or, and this is a very interesting concept, it could be one person doing it to themselves without anybody else interacting. Let me give you an example. A person could be, say, in a job role, and everything seems to be going all right for the person who's employing them, but they have put very high expectations on themselves, which they cannot live up to. So they go home and go, I'm letting my boss down. I'm not doing a good enough job. Everybody there is fed up of me. Where really, the entire workforce might be very happy with their output. They go home on, say, Friday night, feeling like they've let everybody down, feeling guilty that they're not good enough. So what they've done is they've created a persecutor that doesn't even exist. Now, that very often is reliving your past trauma. But then what they could do is say, I'm so stupid, I've let everybody down. And what I'm going to do is maybe go and get a bottle of wine, get drunk for the night. So then what is the bottle of wine? It's the rescuer. They want to have a distraction. They want to disconnect from the day. So they find that alcohol, or it could be smoking or any other type of drugs, to get a disconnection so they feel safe. Then what happens? They wake up in the morning feeling hungover, feeling awful because they might have eaten a lot of junk food, and say, I'm so stupid. I shouldn't have done that. I feel worse for it. Again, they're back in the victim state, and the persecutor is they made the choice to drink alcohol or eat a load of junk food. And then the cycle continues. So as you can see here, the drama triangle is a very simple, straightforward concept of just 3 aspects of human behavior. But there are so many levels. If you've got 10 people in a room who are really struggling with their emotions, then you could have 10 different aspects of this, all going on each minute of the day, interacting with each other, chopping and changing. And every time 2 of these aspects interact with each other, it does cause conflict and potential anxiety and potential re-traumatizing the mind. Because the one thing you need to understand is that for people to use emotionally manipulative behavior, they are struggling with some form of anxiety or overwhelm. So I hope this video has helped you understand a little bit more about the drama triangle and how it can interact with not only ourselves, but also our connections with other people. Now, there are so many areas that I could go into. I could go on for hours about this. I highly recommend visiting Stephen Karpman's website. I'll put a link in the description below because he's got a book. I'm not affiliated with him at all, but I would recommend his work. I think he's absolutely amazing. I've chatted to him over email a couple of times, and he's a wonderful man who just wants to make the world a better place. So have a look at his website, see what you think. Any comments and suggestions and ideas that you may have, or any feedback that you've got, or any ways that you can expand on this, feel free to put them in the comments below. And the one thing I always say about the comments is that you may bring something to the comments that I haven't put into this video. And you never know, your comment could change somebody's life forever. So feel free to put open suggestions in the comments, and let's all grow together.